Cool. Thanks everyone for coming. Just before we get started, can we get a woo? Has anyone here seen the movie Earbud? Cool. Has anyone read the Lawyers and Conveyances Act 2008? All right, sweet. There's like a lot of inside jokes you guys might miss. I've seen the movie like a lot. And I've read the act like a lot. So there's a few inside jokes we might miss. But we'll get going into it. If the clicker will go. Clicker going. Okay, can we go next slide up there? We got control? I can't click. Oh, we go. Sweet. The movie Earbud is about a young boy named Josh whose father died in an experimental plane crash. And Josh and his family, after the experimental plane crash, moved to small-town Washington, where Josh didn't have too many friends. So Josh loved basketball, so every day after school, by himself, he played basketball at an abandoned lot that he found. And one day, at this abandoned lot, a dog turns up, and the dog's name is Buddy. And Buddy was abandoned by an abusive alcoholic clown. It's a Disney movie, we'll get into it, it's a whole thing. And so it turns out Buddy's actually pretty good at basketball by himself. That's Buddy there. Buddy's not that good at basketball, but he's pretty good at basketball. And with the help of Buddy, Josh learns to be really good at basketball, and Josh eventually joins his local school's basketball team. And through the power of friendship and teamwork, it is a Disney movie, they make the state finals. During the finals, one of the players is injured, and Buddy the dog subs on, and eventually the Timberwolves win the finals. So big round of applause to the Timberwolves winning the final. So it's a heartwarming story. It's a very 90s Disney film, all that. But there's like a lot to unpack here. For example, we could do a deep dive on the quite common misconception that's sort of thrown around about the Earbud forums on the internet, I'm sure you'll read, that a child was actually kicked off the team to allow Buddy to play. That's like not true. It's very clear in the movie that Buddy was only a mascot until the finals, where a child was injured and Buddy joined the team. We could also do a deep dive onto why Josh's mother was selling napkins to Venezuela, which is quite a key point in the movie. There's like a lot of phone calls with Josh's mother just talking about how she can't get napkins to Venezuela. We could do a deep dive onto why Disney and the producers of the film felt it necessary to mention that Josh's grandfather was a war hero for his delivery during World War II of Bibles and ham to Muslims in Berlin. We're not going to do that. We could also do a deep dive onto how Josh exclusively feeds Buddy dairy products and spaghetti in a can. But we're going to focus on the key part of the movie, which is the really famous element of Earbud. I'm sure you'll know it, that there ain't no rule says a dog can't play basketball. We're going to sort of look at that aspect through the framework of New Zealand laws and how to sort of apply New Zealand. And specifically, as a practice manager at Godfrey's Law, this is a question that asked me, sort of vexed me a lot. Are there any rules saying dogs can't be lawyers? If I wanted to, could I go out and register a dog as a lawyer in New Zealand and hire them to sort of work for my firm and be a lawyer? So at this point, you're all sort of wondering, why? Why would I want a dog to be a lawyer? And I've got some arguments here. Number one, dogs, they're man's best friend. They can come out, maybe they could provide like emotional support to, say a child going through a family court case, so it's a pretty rough time in a young child's life. Maybe a dog could provide the emotional support that a human lawyer couldn't. Number two, we often hear litigators referred to as bulldogs in court. Maybe by hiring an actual bulldog, I've found a cheat code to hiring a really good litigator. Number three, I'm a practice manager. Maybe I'm just a cynic and it's a good marketing ploy. I'm sure I could get a stuff article out of this or a spin-off article. The first law firm in the world to hire a dog. But number four, it doesn't actually matter. Buddy is pretty shit at basketball, if I'm honest. He's like a liability on defense. He can't dribble. And he's only able to shoot field goals by headbutting the ball when Josh literally throws the ball at his head and he knocks the ball into the goal with his head. Buddy's good at basketball for a dog, but not for a human. The kid who was subbed out for injury, probably better at basketball than Buddy. And a lot of people believe, as I'm sure you'll know, that the reason the Timberwolves won the state final is because of Buddy. That's not true. The reason the Timberwolves won the state final is because the janitor at the school that Josh went to was a former NBA All-Star. And the only reason this janitor became the manager was because Buddy uncovered a crime where the previous coach was assaulting a child. It's a Disney movie. So we could get into a whole thing. Buddy is like way better at fighting crime than he is at playing basketball. And it actually becomes a bit of a thing in the Air Bud franchise. Later on in the film, Buddy actually solves a jewel heist and a kidnapping. There are 5 movies in the Air Bud franchise, so it gets a bit off the rails. And eventually Buddy's grandchildren gain superpowers and sort of become like a young golden retriever Avengers. But we could get into that. They save Christmas twice. We could get into that, but we've got to keep things moving. So essentially what I'm saying here is we don't need our dog to be a good lawyer. We just need it to be a lawyer. So there's like a lot of rules in our society. This is the rule that says don't kill people. Pretty standard rule. This is the rule that says don't illegally download movies to research for a Nerd Night article. And these are the rules that sort of govern who can and can't be a lawyer. Do you want to read that? Yeah. We've got a sort of summary here. These are the 3 main requirements to be a lawyer in New Zealand. So first of all, you've got to have a bachelor's degree in law. You've got to complete a certificate in professional studies and have a certificate of completion saying you've done it. And you've got to have a certificate of character. If you get all that, you can be issued a practicing certificate and register as a lawyer and refer to yourself or refer to your dog as a lawyer in New Zealand. So we'll go through these one by one. First of all, could a dog pass a university degree? In order for a dog to be a lawyer, it would first have to pass a degree. There are no cases of dogs passing degrees in New Zealand. Internationally, there are 8 dogs who have actually passed degrees. Most of these are sort of like piss takes or political statements to discredit universities, saying, look how easy it is to get a degree, even my dog got one. And we're talking about the big international sort of online universities. We've heard University of Phoenix saying, my dog got a degree, look how stupid this university is. Could a dog actually pass a university degree if it really tried to? Well, in New Zealand, law degrees are quite hard, apparently. They sort of take 5 years for many lawyers, the biggest challenge a lot of them face. The dog would probably have to sit still for exams, sit still for lectures. The dog would struggle to write essays, research law. But as we're sort of going through the COVID world, it sort of turns out a lot of universities are making this easy. You can do online exams. You can sort of get a reader-writer to sit these exams. Potentially, with the help of a university reader-writer and sitting online, the dog wouldn't have to sit through lectures, could just read the course notes. And maybe a dog could actually pass a university degree. But the real key part here is we don't care. Ain't no rule say a dog can't get a university degree. So a dog could, in fact, get a certificate of character if they want to. If we assume they can pass a university degree, we'll assume they can pass their professional studies. And we'll assume that someone will give a certificate of character to a very good boy. But we've sort of, or girl, sorry, who was that? Yeah, someone up there. But in fact, we actually get to a bit of a stumbling block here. The Lawyers and Conveyancing Act specifies that even if they pass all those requirements, which there ain't no rules saying they can't, you can only give a practicing certificate, which is the actual certificate saying you can be a lawyer, to a person. And in New Zealand, there are rules saying that dogs are not persons, they're property. So I don't know why you guys are here. Obviously, there are rules saying dogs can't be lawyers. Which leads us into a sort of wormhole here. The definition of a person in law isn't sort of quite how we perceive it in the non-legal world. In law, a person doesn't actually refer to a human being. It refers to anything that has legal personality, which is quite a distinctive topic. For example, in New Zealand, companies and trusts actually have legal personality. And the concept sort of dates back to medieval times when monasteries were owned by monks, essentially, but the monks had taken vows of poverty, which said they couldn't own any property themselves. But they needed assets and wealth to sort of fund their operations. So the church said, instead of the monastery being owned by you, you can define the monastery as being a separate person and it can hold the wealth, which means you can keep your vow of poverty, but you can keep funding your operations. This sort of developed and grew over time into our modern definition of a company. There have sort of been pushes in recent years to make dogs people, or animals generally. This would mean that instead of people owning pets or owning animals, they'd be guardians of them, and this would grant animals certain legal responsibilities and obligations, and give them inalienable rights. And it would also give them the ability to become lawyers. But these are going nowhere. This is going nowhere. So they're gain no traction, and realistically, dogs are going to be property, not persons, for a long time. So we're sort of stuck here. But New Zealand's actually a world leader in using the definition of legal personhood as a way of conveying legal rights to non-humans. Not necessarily to animals, but to environmental features, which is how we get to the Wanganui River. So in 2017, the New Zealand Parliament passed the Te Awa Tupua Wanganui River Claims Settlement Act. This act ended New Zealand's longest running litigation, one of the longest running litigations in the world, which has been running since 1870, and was over whether the Wanganui River was owned by the Crown or iwi. The act was really revolutionary. It sort of changed the law in ways we don't even really understand yet. It separated the river from being just water running down land into being a new legal separate entity. So Te Awa Tupua, which is now the Wanganui River, as a separate legal personality, owns itself. You can't own the Wanganui River anymore. It's a separate legal person. And it was given legal personhood to recognise the traditional Māori view that the river was more than simply water running across the North Island, and was instead its own living being, connected to the land, the fish and the birds in it, who live alongside us, are part of our society, part of our community, and we must respect and refuse to exploit. And if we are going to use the resources of the Wanganui River, whether it be water or fish or birds, we must do so in the best interests of New Zealand law. By granting legal personhood to the river, the government was saying that no one could own it, and that any effort to extract it must be done in the best interests of the river and the community that surrounded it. But more importantly for our purposes, when the government gave Te Awa Tupua legal personhood, they implicitly said that the Wanganui River can be a lawyer. So I emailed every law school in the country and said, would you be willing to give a university degree, specifically an honorary degree, to the Wanganui River to recognise its place in legal history in New Zealand? None of them responded. But most importantly, ain't no rules say you can't give the Wanganui River a university degree. You can give degrees to persons, so we can give the university degree to the Wanganui River. Even if they don't say they will now, they can. This is a pretty shaky premise, I'll give you that. We still require the New Zealand Council of Legal Education to give us an exemption, saying the Wanganui River doesn't need to complete a professional studies course, specifically the course on ethics. But they can do it, and most importantly, ain't no rules say they can't. So if we want to, we really can get the New Zealand Council of Legal Education to give us the pass saying they can be a lawyer. So it's pretty unlikely, but it is possible. Broadly, this is like quite a good thing. The Lawyers and Conveyances Act is written in a way to give legal protection to institutions, saying that if you speak to a lawyer in New Zealand, they are qualified and they know what they're talking about. This is to prevent people in the public from reaching out to a lawyer, someone purporting themselves to be a lawyer, and actually ripping the person off. And this supports trust in the legal industry. There are flexibility in this rules, which is why we get the exemptions, why we get the ability to grant this to rivers. So if it was actually required, we could do it. So while there aren't actually rules saying the Wanganui River can't be a lawyer, there are a lot of layers of protection to stop unqualified people or rivers from registering as lawyers. I'm sure you're wondering, can the Wanganui River register to play middle school basketball in Washington State? No. Because the Washington State basketball rules of eligibility say you have to live in the school zone of the team you're registered to play for. Again, they can grant exemptions, but only if it's not going to change the talent level of the league that the player or river, will register it. So Buddy was a dog who would obviously change the talent level, was actually living in the churchyard within the school district. So we can accept that Buddy will change the talent level, but because he's living in the district, we don't need the exemption for Buddy to play. The Wanganui River will probably change the talent level of the Washington State Middle School Basketball Tournament. So we probably will not get an exemption there. So in conclusion, dogs can play basketball, but can't be lawyers. And if you can't follow along, there's a terrible infographic here. But the Wanganui River can be a lawyer, but can't play basketball. Does any of this matter or mean anything? Nah, not really. Luckily, we don't live in a world of Disney logic. So there may not be rules explicitly forbidding us from making the Wanganui River a lawyer. But we have sensible protections in place, so if we really needed to, we could stop someone registering something stupid as a lawyer. In the unlikely event that anyone did attempt to register the Wanganui River as a lawyer, these protections would stop it and protect the sanctity and the importance of the legal system in this country. In the even more unlikely event that the Wanganui River actually did need to be a lawyer, we have these exemptions in place, so we could bypass them if we really needed to. Thank you. Yeah, over there.
So you said the Wanganui River is now person.
Yes.
Surely it's now no one can touch it unless it gets permission from the Wanganui River.
Yeah, so can we get the slides back? I'll show you something which I think will sort of answer your question a little bit here, because there is a definition in law, the distinction between a person and a human being. If we can get back to the Homicide Act, part of the Crimes Act. The Crimes Act actually specifies, and a lot of other laws do, the difference between a person and a human being. So, for example, the Wanganui River can't commit murder because it's a river, not a human being. So if we can flick back. So just here you can see homicide is defined as the killing of a human being. So that's the distinction there. So a lot of the laws saying you can't, assault someone or touch a random stranger in public actually are defining human beings, not persons. And that sort of protect this. And it's sort of the reason we don't have corporate manslaughter in New Zealand, because we have homicide is defined as the act of killing a human being by another human being. So even though a company is a person, you can't be killed by a company, you're killed by the person who actually committed the act. The human being who committed the act, sorry. Any other questions there? Yep.
So your research has obviously been
Research.
Yeah. It's obviously been based kind of on the New Zealand law, but sort of maybe looking into other countries. I know America has done some pretty wacky stuff, so
Yeah.
Maybe a bit more possible over there.
So the concept of legal personhood is sort of broadly throughout the Commonwealth, and a lot of laws that copied European laws, which are pretty broadly spread throughout the world. And in fact, the Wanganui River, just after the passing of the Te Awa Tupua Act, 2 days later, the High Court of India gave the Ganges River legal personhood. So that sort of concept is broadly expanded on there. I haven't looked too closely at acts regulating lawyers in other countries, but I assume they're similar in their wording, specifically to avoid this exact situation. Yeah, question in the back there?
If you were to drown in that river, does that mean the river killed you?
No, and again, we can go back to the Crimes Act and look at the definition of homicide.
It didn't say it said killing of a human. It didn't say killing by a human.
No, it does. Yeah, human by a human. Yeah, it's specifically defined. And there is a sort of a concept there in law. If you buy a property next to the Wanganui River, for example, it's sort of understood. I don't think it's been clearly tested yet, but the expectation is, if it is tested, there'll be an expectation of sort of buyer beware or caveat emptor. You are to be expected the Wanganui River is a wild thing, and even though the Wanganui River might destroy your property, even though it's a person and has legal liability under there, you have still buyer beware responsibilities to know this could happen. Yeah.
So then if Sue Gray, lawyer for now, drown and what a technical
I can't comment on how So Grey is going to drown the river. Depending on how she drowned, it would not be murder by the river. If someone goes and holds her head under the river, that would be murder. If a dog were to hold her head under the river, that would not be murder. I must specify here, this is not legal advice. If you drown So Grey, Godfrey's law cannot represent you. Yeah.
Can the Wanganoo River makes play high school basketball in the Wanganoo district?
I'll come back to you later. Yeah.
Although it's unlikely, a future reference, what do you think is an acceptable charge out rate for the Wanganui River as a lawyer?
I think you should be willing to pay whatever your lawyer wants to charge you. Don't argue with your lawyer. He's right.
Alright, we might wrap it up there. Thank you, Charlie.